The very first birth I attended really, for me, illustrated the incredible degree to which there's a lack of consent in obstetrics in the United States. I'm Ivy. I'm a longtime friend of Maya's and a birth doula in practice since 2009, and I attend birth in both home and hospital settings. This was a mom who really wanted a natural birth. She had really poured a lot of herself into preparing for this birth. She'd done a lot of classes and a lot of reading, and she'd actually written an article that she was really proud of about her journey and about her vision for her birth. The woman's water broke, and like a lot of first-time moms, she went right into the hospital not knowing not to do that. They didn't let her leave. They said she needed to stay there, which now I understand is illegal, because every woman has a right to informed consent refusal. But at the time, as a brand new doula, I didn't realize they couldn't legally keep her there against her will. She didn't want any medication, but she also felt safest giving birth in a hospital. Of course, within a couple of hours, they wanted to speed up labor, and so they gave her Pitocin. All day, she really tried to resist these interventions. Every time they wanted to up the Pitocin, she asked for more time. Within a couple hours of that, obviously, the pain was so intense that she couldn't go on, and she felt like she needed an epidural because they just kept on increasing the Pitocin. And so with the epidural, labor slowed. It was a really classic case. This is not unusual at all, of a cascade of interventions that stalls labor and puts the baby in distress. At that time, the doctor came in, and he had been really pressuring her all day to do more interventions, and she was getting exhausted. She hadn't slept, obviously. She was, by this point, very tearful and vulnerable, and he was being really intimidating and telling her that you're hurting your baby, which is something we hear a lot. It's a very common technique that providers can use for leverage. That's all you have to say to a laboring woman in labor is you're hurting your baby, and they'll kind of do anything you say. Around 10 o'clock at night, I watched every single woman on that labor floor who hadn't delivered yet was lined up for cesarean births, including that client. The doctors wanted to go home. They didn't want to have to be called back to the hospital. What struck me the most about this delivery, because all of this is a very classic story, this happens every day all across America, was that the woman in recovery right next to my client hadn't resisted. She was very cooperative, including the cesarean. Whereas my client had not been. She had really used her voice and tried to advocate for herself. And the doctor instructed the anesthesiologist to just knock her out. So by the time my client received her baby, she wasn't even able to breastfeed.
And has this always been how the medical system has functioned, where women are just treated like bodies that the doctors just do whatever they will with?
Well, if you look at the roots of modern Western medicine, the roots were a distrust of women. Mm-hmm. Because originally, before birth was driven into the hospital, all births were attended by skilled midwives, which were women. At the times of the witch hunt and the Salem witch trials, these women were burned at stake as witches. And so that just coincidentally, I don't think it was such a coincidence, happened to occur simultaneously with the rise of medical professionals, which were predominantly male doctors.
So what I hear you saying is that in the current system that's set up, where women are giving birth in ways that are not necessarily consenting, that are unnatural in many cases, and that are geared more towards the doctor's, ability to go home early and give a C-section at the time that he wants, we're basically negating the trust in a natural system that had worked for countless centuries. And just like what we do to the earth, just like what we do, how we think about natural processes of the earth. We're the authorities, we're the experts. You don't know what to do with your own body, despite these women having this wisdom for years and knowing that it is a symbiotic system. It's like what you said to me about how Pitocin and epidurals and how they all affect each other. And how one will slow it up and one will speed it up, and it all makes it a terribly stressful environment for a woman. Mm-hmm. All of it feels like ignoring the symbiosis of a system that functions pretty freaking well. That is the main connection with how we treat women and how we treat the earth. Because we treat the earth as parceled out individual items that aren't in relationship to each other, right? And that are just bought and sold easily. Climate change, I think, is really opening up everyone's eyes because it's showing that if you do one thing to this part of the system here, it changes this part of the system here, and it's one whole relationship. And that, I think that's a very, like, you know, let me know if you agree, but like, I think that's a very feminine concept. It's a partnership model. It's not this masculinized top-down ideology, you know, and theology.
Well, and it's also looking at the woman as a whole, as opposed to just a physical body.
They prioritize the baby over the mother.
Right. And they prioritize just the numbers that they're seeing physically, putting women into a chart according to numbers, as opposed to really looking at the woman as a whole. How does she feel? What does she think about this? What's her perspective as a human being?
That domination and that lack of an awareness of symbiosis is patriarchal, and it's also like authoritarian. It's thinking that we know so much better than a system that would function really well. So just
because
like a
we
mother,
don't trust it. We don't trust women. We don't trust nature.
the earth, yeah.
We don't trust birth.
Just like birth, yeah. Birth to for many years is like messy and like don't touch that, and it's profane. It's not sacred. It's not valued, and we treat the earth the same flippin' way.
The United States today actually has the highest maternal death rate in the developed world. And the reason for that, from the perspective of anyone who's familiar with how birth is done in this country, is obvious. That it's the degree of control and interference we do on the labor process that interferes with the woman's natural ability to birth the way nature designed.
So what do you see as the ideal way to treat women giving birth?
We need to be treating women as sovereign beings with wisdom, with knowledge, with valid feelings and perspectives, and really be giving women honest information and knowledge of their options so that they can make the choice that's best for them as an individual.
Beautiful. And can you imagine what it would be like if we said that statement about the earth? If we trusted earth processes as sovereign and valid and natural and of their own understanding and sacred. Think about how our relationship would shift with the earth, with women, with all of these natural processes that we think of as so profane, as dirty, as bloody, as messy, but that are actually the things that are bringing life into this world. Just like women, the earth is giving life everywhere, all around us. It's creating new species. Why do we not think of that as wondrous in every moment and trust that it has got it and not mess with the process? This is my dear friend Ivy. I'm so grateful that we had this conversation today. Every day, all the time.
Gungho Eco.